report that just broadcast on CNN some 5 months ago, which was the beginning of the protests taking place in Lebanon proper. This dealing with social unrest, devastating foreign debt, and obligations which have been unfulfilled in the wake of a power vacuum with the Shia militia terror organization, Hezbollah, now having taken over. Let's go to the tape.
Fourth straight day, the protests continued, each day bigger than the day before. The atmosphere is jubilant. But the underlying grievances are real. Anger over a faltering economy, official corruption, and barely functioning basic services. 5-year-old Yusuf suffers from a hereditary disease. His father, Ibrahim, an ex-soldier, can't find work, can't afford Yusuf's treatment. Along with his wife, Farah, they tried to leave the country by boat with Syrian refugees to Turkey. We paid 8,000 euros, says Ibrahim. We sold our car, my motorbike, hoping we would find something better outside. The boat sank. They barely survived.
Ms. Ghaddar, welcome to the interview.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us this morning. Now, that was 5 months ago that we saw that report on CNN broadcast from Lebanon. The situation was before the coronavirus. It was before COVID-19. It was before a whole mess of other iterations which had happened, which I think we had seen now in and of itself go to a whole new situation of deterioration and distraught in Lebanon. Now, I understand we were watching a Syrian refugee when that was on the television screen. It wasn't a Lebanese national, but still, I think his frustration is shared by many Lebanese. What's happening in Beirut today?
Okay, that was not many months ago, right? So, but many things happened since then that the news of the demonstration has faded because many more serious issues started since February. The demonstrations started October 17 and they lasted for a couple of months on full blast, very energetic. Everyone was taking it very, very seriously, and it also spread to the region because what's happening in Lebanon was also happening in Iraq. And that, I think, was very interesting because these are the two countries that are controlled by the Iranian regime. And it's very interesting that the Shia areas in Iraq were out in the streets, and at the same time, many Shia in Lebanon participated in these demonstrations against the government that was tailored by Hezbollah, the main militia in the region sponsored by the Iranian regime. Created and sponsored and funded by the Iranian regime. So it was very interesting to see people in the streets in both these countries, and the context of the revolution in Lebanon, the October 17 revolution, it is not independent of what was happening in the whole region as a reaction to the Iranian regime's policy in the region, where it was more mayhem and devastation and economic collapse of all the countries that they have been controlling for a very long time. And then people went to the street in Lebanon right after Hezbollah claimed victory over the Lebanese state institutions and won the elections. It was fascinating that the moment Hezbollah became the authority in Lebanon, people went to the streets. In some areas, they were directly attacking Hezbollah as being responsible for the economic collapse of Lebanon. In other areas, they were not directly attacking Hezbollah. Obviously, it's not easy to go against Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's very dangerous. And a lot of people have been violently attacked because of their direct criticism. But even if they weren't directly attacking Hezbollah, they were criticizing the reason behind the economic collapse, which is the corruption and the failed government that is controlled by Hezbollah, that has been formed by Hezbollah and its allies. So this happened that got Hezbollah in a very vulnerable point. And then it didn't stop because Hezbollah won and the people in the street got tired. It stopped because Corona happened. And because before Corona, the virus that is stopping the whole world today, even before then, Hezbollah made sure that the street demonstrations cannot continue the way they were. So they used violence against the people. They frightened some people to go home, especially in the Shia areas. And I have to say, for the first time since I was born, probably, the Shia participated in a national revolution. 2005, the Cedar Revolution in Lebanon, they got the Syrian army to leave Lebanon, was a great moment for Lebanon, but it was not perfect because the whole Shia community was not a vital participant. There were some individual Shia, but not like as a community. They were completely sidelined in this. This is the first time where 3 main Shia cities in Lebanon, that is Tyre, Nabatiyeh, and Baalbek, participated in the revolution. So this got Hezbollah in a very, very nice spot.
I want to ask you about that for a second, in terms of comparing history here. We had the Taif Accords and the civil war in Lebanon, which was from 1975 until the late 80s, 1990. And then there was a period of relative Syrian domination over the country until the Cedar Revolution in 2005. What makes the fact that Hezbollah takes over the government? It has its own prime minister. It has its own Christian allies. You have some Sunnis who have been pushed to the side. Even Walid Jumblat and the Druze get behind them at the outset of this. And then the country explodes. How were they able to get power and then so quickly be faced with the legitimization of their own ability to consolidate power after they took it?
You mean Hezbollah?
Correct.
Okay, so Hezbollah took power by force. They didn't take power because people liked them. They really used force. And we have to remember that since 2005 until today, there have been a lot of dramatic moments in Lebanon, which is, I can count easily, the 2006 war with Israel, the 2008 May 7 events when Hezbollah used its arms against other Lebanese for the first time. This is something that led to the Doha Accord, where March 14, the anti-Hezbollah camp that used to win won the elections twice since 2005 surrendered completely. And also Hezbollah and the Syrian regime, and we still have an international tribunal to look into all that. They have assassinated all these people. So they used power, they used their force, they used their arms in order to consolidate power. They didn't really win democratically. They won because they have the gun at the heads of these people. However, to answer your question,
I just want to make a point for a second. Not arguing that they had legitimate takeover, but all of the other institutions who would have otherwise faced off against them in a non-kinetic way were weakened to the point that it allowed Hezbollah to fill the vacuum.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. No, not as a question. I was saying that with the way in which we were looking at how Hezbollah has in one way or another taken control, I agree with you that it was done through force, but also because all of the other Lebanese institutions which would have acted in one way or another as a bulwark against them being able to take that control, dissipated and have effectively become obsolete, from the political institutions to the different bodies representing different minority groups, and even the armed forces, which are now an extension of Hezbollah.
Yeah, so I have to say that this happened gradually. You are absolutely right. This happened gradually, and this happened also because the March 14 coalition, they lost a lot of their intellectuals and main leaders. There were a number of assassinations that happened, a series of assassinations that happened against March 14 leadership since the moment they won, like since 2005 until May event, where like the Doha agreement was basically give us power, we'll stop killing you. That was it. So they eventually surrendered. But we also have to understand that March 14 was not like the ideal coalition for Lebanon. They were a coalition of political forces that were not in total agreement with each other, that they gathered around the one goal, which is getting the Syrian army out. But eventually they are, at the end of the day, the warlords that we inherited from the civil war. Many of them are corrupt people, and they still are in power because of their corruption, they weren't a coherent, ideal coalition that really wanted what's best for the Lebanese. They had a lot of issues, and the best of them were killed. Really, like this eventually got to a point where they March 14 tried, succeeded in a certain extent, but failed also because Hezbollah's violence and their own vision for Lebanon that did not really match the moment of 2005 of like the people in the street. They really didn't really fulfill their promises. So that was an issue. And meanwhile, this the system of corruption that governs all parties from both sides and Hezbollah's violence got the institution, which was weakened by the Assad regime, to be further weakened. And it's not. It wasn't easy to rebuild the institutions without having a stable political scene, and this was never happened. And Hezbollah kind of inherited the Syrian regime, right? They did not allow the Syrian regime to leave. And this was the moment when Hezbollah decided to be part of the government, to be part of the institutions. It was easier for them to be the opposition, because as an opposition, you can criticize the government, you're not in the government, and you can always look perfect for the people, because you are, as Hezbollah, the opposition, they were always, saying like the government is wrong, people have the right to complain. But now they are the authority. They did not want to be the authority, but they had to be the authority when the Syrian regime left, and they took over the institutions. That was an advantage in the sense that they own the institutions today, the Lebanese state institutions, but it's a disadvantage in the sense that when the institutions fail, like today, and the protests in the streets start attacking the failing institutions, in a way they are attacking Hezbollah because they are the authority, not the opposition anymore. And they have failed as an authority.
Let's advance for a second here. We're now in April. The protests took place starting in October. You make the point that the coronavirus basically ended the protests because of social distancing. You can't get a whole mass of people together because he might get infected. I get it.
Yes.
What's next?
Okay, so we don't know what's going to happen next in details, like how this is going to end, when coronavirus, like globally, is going to be contained, if and when and how. But we know that in Lebanon, Hezbollah today is in charge, and they are the authority, right? But they have two main challenges today, right? Everyone knows that they are in charge of all the increased number of the coronavirus cases that came to Lebanon from Iran. They have brought the coronavirus to Lebanon from Iran, and that's why they actually came up with this like strategy, health emergency plan that took the news by force, and like they are the only ones who have the equipment and the resources. They have a lot of people, but I don't think they have the resources and the equipment. They talked about nurses and doctors, but they didn't talk about the ventilators. So it's really a void shifting narrative plan in order to try to contain what they have done and fix their mistakes. And this is something that is not going to be easy to do, because we have a lot more infected people in the Shia communities than what is reported in Lebanon today. What's reported is 606. I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I said, how bad is it? What kind of casualties are we looking at right now?
Okay, so the reported numbers are 600 and some today, which are increasing every day little by little. But we know that there are thousands unreported numbers in the Shia community, and this has been reported by foreign press recently. They haven't really reported the exact number of how many thousands, but the general sense is between 4,000, 6,000 infected people within the Shia community. I can't confirm the number, but it's definitely in the thousands. And they've been hiding these numbers because they don't want people to know that they have so many infected cases within their own community, because the blame will be on them, because they brought these people in. So this is a challenge that they are trying to deal with. And maybe when this is over, it will be off their back at one point, if they were able to keep hiding these numbers. The other challenge really is the resources and the economy. This is something that, like with the US sanctions on the Iranians, Hezbollah lost a lot of the money that was directly coming from Iran. They're trying to compensate it with smuggling. They increase the smuggling operations along the borders of Lebanon, Syria, and then from Syria to the region. But it's still not enough to compensate the money that they lost from Iran. They're trying to get some resources. They have a lot of businesses in Iraq, so they're trying to get what they need also from Iraq, but still it's not enough. And now they're asking people, their own community, to stay home. And Hassan Nasrallah himself asked people to stay home and contain themselves and practice social distancing. But if you want them to stay home, you have to provide them with food and water and basic needs, because they can't go out and work. A lot of these people have already lost their jobs because of the financial situation, and more today are losing their jobs because of the coronavirus. So now you have to provide them with, to help them survive. And the problem is that Hezbollah came up with an emergency health plan that is void of substance, but is incapable of providing its own constituency with jobs and basic needs. So that's why you see, for example, in Dahi last week, there was a demonstration in Hayy Silom, which is the poorest neighborhood in the southern suburbs of Beirut, Hezbollah's stronghold. People today they have to choose between dying from corona or dying from hunger. And this is Hezbollah's constituency. And we are going to see this more and more as we go on. And what I predict, like, this is just like projection. I don't know if this is going to happen. This is going to get worse. The financial situation in Lebanon is only going to get worse, with a lot of people losing their jobs, and a lot of people are estimating that even when it comes to the basic needs, there will be a lot of shortages, because what we have now already in Lebanon, storages, is enough for 2 months. But then if the private sector wants to start importing, because we don't produce a lot in Lebanon, so if they want to start importing, they need dollars, they need hard currency to import, and they don't have it. So that's a problem.
Foreign currency shortage right now in the Lebanese central bank.
Exactly.
The Saudis offer to come in. The Qataris were going to give a bailout. What's the status right now with monetary policy for the country?
The international community all together agreed, including the Gulf and the Qataris and everyone, agreed that Lebanon will not be bailed out unless Lebanon goes and makes some reforms. And Lebanon today, the Lebanese government is coming up with one plan after another that does not include serious reforms. Because if you include serious reforms and you start implementing serious reforms, the corrupt class will be out. And this is something that they cannot tolerate. And Hezbollah is not going to be okay with it, because they will lose their allies and they will lose their people and the business community. So what's going to happen is that there will be no reforms, which means no bailout, which means more deteriorating financial and economic situation in Lebanon. And what I think is going to happen is that when the coronavirus situation is going to be eased up and maybe like contained at one point, I'm expecting a second wave of protests that is going to be much bigger, more vicious, angrier, hungry people in the streets who have nothing left to lose. And it will be really from everywhere, like every single poor area in Lebanon, Sunni, Shia, Christian, you name it. And I think when it comes to hunger and lack of food and lack of resources and lack of basic needs, politics will not be important anymore. And Hezbollah has a really huge challenge today when it comes to containing these people, because they can give them a bed in a hospital, but they cannot give them food. And this is something that a bigger challenge that they have to deal with.
You could ostensibly have a critical mass of people getting together, ignoring social distancing restrictions, and flooding the streets of Beirut, demanding that Hezbollah give over the reins of power to someone else. So I want to talk about for a second the future of Lebanon's next generational political leadership. If everyone who was part of the March 14th coalition, Hezbollah, those who were inherited from the time of the Civil War, are no longer considered to be legitimate political actors, who's going to replace them?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and that's a question that a lot of people who were active in the protests since 2019, October 2019, have been asking themselves. And I think it's not that easy because Lebanon has been controlled by the same people and governed by the same people for such a long time. But there are options. And I'll give you an example. The protesters all agreed on one prime minister and a number of ministers who can be in an ideal government that can get Lebanon to implement reforms and work for the enhancement of the situation. Nawaf Islam is a good guy. He has a political career. He's a decent guy, and the protesters were okay with him. But of course, he was vetoed by the political class because they don't want someone. The alternatives are there. Nawaf Islam is there. There are a number of ministers and potential ministers and people who can actually work in a Salam government like this and be there for the people. We already had someone who took over the syndicate of lawyers who is doing a great job. These people are there. What you really need is the support of the international community to get these people to actually, present themselves with power and leverage and authority. And you also need a new electoral law in order to produce a fresh parliament, because the new parliament with new electoral law, a representative electoral law, can get rid of this current parliament. And the new parliament is going to produce a new president and a new government. And that's the only way. And to get really, to move forward things in Lebanon, you really need to start with the electoral law. And the electoral law and early elections as a second step. And this would be a huge first step towards real change. I'm not worried about the people. I'm worried about the current class refusing any kind of reform, whether it comes to the electoral law or early elections or anything that would get them out of power. The candidates are there. It's a question of how to get rid of these people in order to bring the new people in.
Right, and let's move over to the armed forces for a second. A big bone of contention in Washington before the onset of the coronavirus, especially with Middle East policy, was the U.S. Again having the American aid in the realm of hundreds of millions of dollars to the Lebanese armed forces. Now, this was stopped. It was reactivated. There was a lot of contention going on. I'm not sure where it is right now in the foreign aid bill. Do you think it's responsible American policy to cut off aid to the LAF until Hezbollah is out of power?
I don't think it's a question. My answer is not a yes or no question, right? It's definitely not a yes, because the aid as it is now, where, the U.S. is not going to interfere or impose any conditions on the aid and let the Lebanese armed forces use the aid the way they see fit, is a wrong approach, in my opinion, because now everyone in the army is benefiting from it. That is, the pro-Hezbollah guys and the anti-Hezbollah guys are benefiting from this aid. And I don't think that the U.S. should be giving the aid to the Lebanese armed forces without conditioning it. That being said, I think this aid is the only leverage that the U.S. has in Lebanon today. So it's a question of, if the U.S. really wants to keep this leverage, then it has to keep the aid. If the U.S. does not really care about having a leverage in Lebanon, then that's a different story. I think my opinion is that the aid should continue. However, it has to be restructured and conditioned heavily in order to make sure that the leverage stays. The U.S. still keeps the leverage in Lebanon without benefiting the people who are pro-Hezbollah within these institutions. And it's not difficult to figure out the units and the officers and the field officers who are pro-Hezbollah. This is something that everyone knows in Lebanon. It's a small country and everybody knows everybody. So it's not that difficult to restructure the aid in that sense.
So you
and I think,
for instance, just to give an example, let's give money to the artillery corps because they're under Sunni influence, versus giving money to the infantry because their special operations division or the military police have a lot of Hezbollah proxies that are there. Is that what you mean?
I think, this is what I'm saying, but not along sectarian lines, because Hezbollah also functions through non-Shia allies. It's really about political affinity.
You have the president. I mean, most Lebanese state institutions are now controlled by Hezbollah allies. So even if you were to give the monies to a, ostensibly apolitical defense minister or the interior minister for administration,
Yeah.
they're still under the general command of the president of Lebanon, who's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. So how can you bifurcate aid going from Hezbollah friends to Hezbollah enemies and not look at sectarian lines when the country's made up along sectarian lines?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I think I missed that. You were disconnected for a little bit.
Sure. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right, great. We've gone 25 minutes so far without technical issues. So this is a new record. But I was asking in a more general sense, how can we ignore sectarian lines when we're deciding who to give aid to in Lebanon, considering the fact that the country is, and its political institutions and its military is based along those same sectarian lines that are now being used to divide, again, the Shia, the Sunni, the Druze, and the Maronites.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, you shouldn't think along sectarian lines when you're giving aid to Lebanon, because every sect has allies. Every sect has Hezbollah allies. So it's not really about the sect. Hezbollah has become national. It's no longer a Shia organization. It is a national and a regional organizations that has allies across all sects. I think you need to think, like, when I think of having considering aid to Lebanon, or considering this aid per se to Lebanon, you need to think of political affiliation, not sects. It's really about who this person is affiliated with, versus are they obviously against Hezbollah, or are they affiliated with an ally of Hezbollah? And that's how you can figure out how to spend your money, instead of give it to the Sunnis and the Christians versus the Shia, because this is definitely no longer the guideline for Lebanese politics.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second and say that any state institution which receives American aid, I believe, is an appendage of Hezbollah and its allies, regardless of sectarian lines. So just like you say, sectarian divisions in the way in which we allocate aid has to go out the window, I'm saying that all aid to Lebanon has to go out the window until Hezbollah is out of power. I mean, you can call me an absolutist if you want, but I'd like you to respond to that.
Yeah. I don't think it's really about if the U.S. wants to keep the aid, keep this leverage in Lebanon or not. If there is like no need for a leverage, then yes, that's obviously a solution. But I still think that it's very useful to the U.S. to have some kind of leverage in Lebanon. And within the army itself, there are a lot of people within the army who, especially like a lot of high commanders within the army, who are not okay with Hezbollah controlling the state institutions, and they will be happy if their colleagues who are pro-Hezbollah are not receiving the aid and they are. So it can be structured in a way. And like, for example, Hezbollah's main security institution is not really the army, it's the general security. The army is considered pro-Hezbollah in some way, but it's not Hezbollah's main security institutions. And it's divided and in a way that, for example, the intelligence or some parts of the intelligence and the military tribunal are definitely pro-Hezbollah, but the others are not necessarily. So it's really about the divisions and the units and the officers. And it's an opportunity to make it less controlled by Hezbollah through appointments, for example, and through restructuring. And there's an opportunity. So it's not easy. It's a tough act. It's complicated, and it requires a lot of pressure on the army institution, but it can be done. I really still believe that this institution, despite everything that is happening, it's still more let's say, nuanced than the other security institutions like the general security, which there's nothing to be done about it at this point.
Perhaps the last redoubt of resistance to the resistance is maybe the way that we
yeah.
Look at it. And I'm along with you. I have hope too. If the LAF can be reformed, if we can do targeted aid, if we can do targeted withholding of aid, we can try it. I'm just worried that more American arms and wares and monies are going to go into Hezbollah's hands. So Hezbollah
doesn't need the arms and the money. This is not what Hezbollah wants from the army. What Hezbollah wants from the army is the political decision that comes with appointments. They bring their people, and it's really the political decision is what they need. The training and the arms and the money is really going to the army, and then the political decision is benefiting from all of that, right? So it really starts with the appointments, and I think this is part of restructuring the aid, is that it has to be conditioned on the appointments as well. So it's not like anyone can.
I understand what you're saying, but when I see M130A American armored personnel carriers and howitzers and other weapons being used by Hezbollah going into Syria, like we saw with the Arsal campaign 5 years ago, it's a little bit disturbing that they're using American aid, and that's what I mean by the arms and the wares.
No,
so
definitely.
I wouldn't want them going across the Israeli border, for instance.
Yeah, that was a show and a message. That wasn't really because they needed that equipment. They really wanted to send a message saying that we have access, like this is their way of showing power and access. But it's really the equipment that they need. It's the political decision.
Well, Hanin, I appreciate you taking time to join us on Middle East Forum Radio today. And we wish you the best.
My pleasure.
The rest of your fellowship at the Washington Institute. Please, can you tell us how we can follow you on Twitter and how we can follow your work online?
My work is all on the Washington Institute website. It's under my expert page, and I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Hanin, my full name, Hanin, GDR.
All right, at Hanin GDR on Twitter. Hanin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And that's all for this segment of Middle East Forum Radio. We'll be right